The air at the Highgate Springs border crossing was heavy, the kind of July heat that clings to skin and makes fabric stick. We had been on the road since dawn, and by the time we pulled into the checkpoint, the car smelled of sweat, sunscreen, and the remnants of fast food wrappers. Gavin cut the engine, and everyone clambered out into the glare. Edric stretched and groaned theatrically, handing me his tote without looking back. Roxanne added her duffel to the pile. Sable passed me her oversized carry-all, still open at the top with bottles and scarves spilling out. Theo slung his backpack toward me with a shrug, his earbuds still in. My arms strained as I stacked the pieces together, adjusting the straps to keep them from sliding. Gavin shut the trunk and smirked in my direction. "Come on, Mom. Carry our bags or walk home." His tone was light, almost playful, but the words landed like a slap. The others laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, just the comfortable chuckle of people who already agreed with the joke. I stood in the middle of the gravel lot with 4 bags pressing into my shoulders and thought of how many years I had carried more than luggage for this family. Groceries, bills, silence. The customs canopy ahead shimmered in the heat, officers waving cars through one by one. Gavin was already striding forward, paperwork in hand. Sable adjusted her sunglasses for a photo by the bilingual sign. Edric and Roxanne compared the price of maple syrup they hoped to buy once we were across. I steadied the weight in my hands, shifted my feet on the hot pavement, and whispered the word before I even knew I'd said it. Fine. The bag settled into place by the grass, handles upright, ready for whoever chose to notice, and I began to wonder when exactly an invitation had turned into a test. 2 months before the border crossing. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Saratoga Springs when Gavin called. His voice carried the eager note he reserved for ideas he wanted me to accept without resistance. "It'll be quality family time. Mom, you've never been to Montreal. We'll all go together." I pictured cobblestone streets, the kind of architecture I had only seen in books from the library where I worked before retirement. The thought warmed me, and I said yes before asking any practical questions. Later, Sable called to coordinate. Her tone was brisk, her sentences clipped. "Since you're less busy, it'll be easier if you book the flights. And your card has the better points. Right. We'll square it later." Efficiency was her favorite word, and it always seemed to mean more work for me. When the confirmations came through, the charges had landed squarely in my account. I told myself it was temporary. At the airport, it was the same story. Gavin explained that their tickets didn't cover checked luggage. Mine did. I handed over my card. The agent printed extra tags, sliding them across to me with practiced detachment. In the rental car lot in Burlington, Gavin took the driver's seat without asking. Sable claimed the passenger side, and Theo slid into the middle row. I was directed to the back, Gavin smiling as if he'd done me a favor. More legroom back there. Mom, I knew what it really meant. More silence. Still, I kept hope alive. Maybe once we reached Montreal, the strain would ease. Maybe sightseeing and shared meals would remind them I was more than a wallet and a pair of hands. I wanted to believe the trip could stitch something back together. That was why, even then, I ignored the first small signs of what was to come. We stopped first in Burlington, parking near the Church Street Marketplace. The brick promenade was crowded with tourists and buskers, the air full of roasted coffee and summer heat. Sable looped her arm through Roxanne's, pointing at boutiques, while Edric strode ahead to inspect menus. Theo trailed behind, face lit by his phone. My role became obvious the moment Gavin gestured toward the shopping bags. Mom, can you just hang on to these while we check out that store? I stood by a planter filled with petunias, bags pressing into my wrist, watching them drift in and out of shops. Every few minutes I glanced at the camera in Gavin's hand. When he stopped to take photos, I thought he might call me over, but each time it was only just us three, Sable positioning herself between father and son. The in-laws smiling in the background. Later, I saw the captions posted online, cheerful hashtags, and no space for me. That evening in Stowe, we dined at a place with exposed beams and wine lists longer than menus. Edric ordered extravagantly. Roxanne followed, and no one hesitated when the bill landed, except me. $300 slid onto my card with Gavin's easy promise, "We'll sort it out when we're home." I nodded, though I knew already there would be no sorting. After dinner, we passed a craft stall lit by string lights. Pottery glowed in soft blues and greens, imperfect, but clearly shaped by careful hands. A small plate with a blue rim caught my eye. Tulip patterns circling the edge. Sable appeared beside me long enough to say, "That won't match your kitchen." Before drifting away, I bought it quietly, wrapping it in paper, tucking it into my bag. For once, I chose something only for myself. On the walk back, Edric chuckled as I slowed on the incline. "Older folks walk slower but balance weight better," he said, hoisting his own empty hands. Laughter followed. I kept climbing, counting each step like a mark on a private ledger. The next day, we would be heading north again, and my list was already long. By the time we reached Highgate Springs, the car felt like an oven. The sun pressed down on the roof, and the line of vehicles crawled toward the customs canopy. Gavin pulled over near the pedestrian area, snapping that everyone should stretch before he handled the papers. Sable gathered her sunglasses. Edric and Roxanne stepped ahead as though leading a parade, and Theo hopped out with his earbuds still in place. I stayed by the trunk, lifting bags that weren't mine. One by one, they were stacked into my arms, the straps cutting into my shoulders. Gavin glanced back at me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Mom, carry our bags or walk home." Theo chuckled under his breath, a sound caught somewhere between amusement and nerves. No one else said a word. I stood there, sweat sliding down my spine, the weight of their belongings pressing harder than the July air. I set the luggage down on the patch of grass by the parking lane. Carefully, handles upright, zippers aligned, straps smoothed flat. Not a drop, not a throw, a release. "Fine," I whispered, and I turned away. The rest area for southbound travelers stood just across the lot, a low building with vending machines humming against the wall. My legs carried me there as if they'd known all along where to go. Inside, I asked the attendant for a cab number. My voice shook only once. 10 minutes later, a local driver pulled up in a dented sedan. "St. Albans," I said. $28. "Cash," he answered. I slid the bills from the emergency fold in my wallet, the one I'd always kept tucked away. The car pulled out, air conditioning rattling, the highway stretching south. Through the rear window, the checkpoint shrank until it was just a shimmer of asphalt and white tents. Somewhere back there, they were still laughing, or maybe already searching for me. But my passport was zipped into my purse, my phone in my pocket, and for the first time in years, I felt no obligation to turn around. The road bent toward the lake, and the green hills of Vermont opened before me. St. Albans waited just ahead, quiet and unfamiliar, but mine to enter on my own terms. The cab let me off near Taylor Park in St. Albans, a quiet green square ringed by brick buildings and shaded by maples. The driver pulled away, and for the first time in days, no one was waiting for me to follow. I walked toward a narrow building with a painted sign that read, "Pelletier's Inn." The front door creaked when I pushed it open, and a bell chimed overhead. A woman appeared from the back hallway, silver hair pulled into a neat twist, her apron dusted with flour. "You need a room?" she asked. her accent laced with French vowels. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Just for one night?" She studied me, then nodded without fuss. "Cash," I slid folded bills across the counter. She didn't ask for anything more than my name. "Marianne Pelletier," she said, extending a hand. "Welcome." The stairs groaned under my weight as I carried my small purse to the second floor. The room she opened for me was simple pale blue curtains stirring in the breeze. A wooden bed with a quilt folded at the foot. A view of the hills beyond the rooftops. No television, no hum of air conditioning, just silence. I dropped my shoes by the bed but didn't change. I lay down fully dressed. Purse clutched to my chest, and sleep closed over me like a heavy blanket. When I woke, the light had shifted. Outside, the town moved at its own pace, slow, unhurried, unconcerned with me. At the desk in the corner, I booked a southbound ticket on the Amtrak Vermonter. St. Albans to Albany the next morning. The confirmation number glowed on the screen. Proof that I had chosen a direction. I pulled my notebook from my bag and wrote 3 sentences I left. "I'm safe. I will not explain." Then I slipped the blue-rimmed plate, wrapped in paper, beside the bed as if it were a talisman. The room settled around me, calm and undemanding. For the first time in years, I could hear my own breath without the echo of someone else's expectations. By the time the train rolled back into Albany, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I carried only my purse, a single overnight bag, and the blue plate carefully wrapped in my coat. The rest, I had already decided, was no longer mine to carry. I called Maeve Donnelly's office from the station. She had been my attorney since George died. Steady and direct, never wasting words. When I explained what I needed, she gave me an appointment for the following morning. Her office sat in a converted townhouse near Washington Park, the kind with creaky floors and shelves lined with law books that had seen decades of sunlight. She poured me coffee and listened while I laid it out. I didn't give her the details of the border. Only the truth that mattered. Gavin had been given too much power, and I wanted it back. We began with the durable power of attorney. Gavin's name had been there since the year after George passed, chosen out of habit more than trust. Maeve slid the revocation across the desk, her pen steady in my hand as I signed. Next came the bank accounts. Gavin had been listed as a pay-on-death beneficiary, a detail I barely remembered agreeing to. One form removed him, another added my nieces, women who still sent Christmas cards and called on my birthday. The co-signed home equity line followed. Gavin had persuaded me it would be convenient for emergencies, though the only emergencies it ever solved were his. Maeve called the bank while I sat across from her desk. By the end of the conversation, the line was frozen and scheduled to close. Finally, we opened my will. The old version gave Gavin authority he had not earned. The new draft left small bequests to family who had shown kindness, and the rest to fund a scholarship at the Saratoga Public Library, where I had spent my happiest years. Maeve gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Simple paperwork can close doors that disrespect kept open," she said, her eyes meeting mine. I felt the truth of it settle like a lock clicking shut. When I stepped back onto the street, the summer air carried no weight, only space for the life I had just begun to rewrite. The lease was signed within a week, a top-floor one-bedroom on a quiet street near Congress Park. Small enough that I could clean it in an hour, large enough for light to flood through the east-facing windows each morning. I carried in my boxes one by one, each chosen carefully, each pared down from the clutter of a larger house. 2 coats for the seasons, folded over the back of a chair, George's letters, tied with string and placed in the drawer of the bedside table. My old field guide to northeast birds, its spine worn soft from years of thumbing, and the blue-rimmed plate unwrapped and set in the center of the kitchen shelf, as if it had always belonged there. Everything else I donated. Furniture too large. Linens I never used. Ornaments given out of obligation rather than affection. The absence of those things felt like fresh air. For the first time in decades, the space around me matched the size of my own life. I began to shape new rhythms. Morning walks along the spring run trail, listening to the water cut beneath the bridge. Coffee at Mrs. London's bakery, where the staff quickly learned I preferred mine black. Afternoons at the library, where I took out more books in a week than I had in years, savoring the freedom of no deadlines but my own. The silence of the apartment was steady, not empty. In that quiet, I wrote a letter I would never send. It was to Theo, the grandson who had once held my hand across parking lots and who had laughed, however nervously, at the border. There's a difference between helping and erasing. I wrote, I hope someday you will see it. I folded the page, slipped it between George's letters, and left it there as a truth marked but not spoken. Each day, the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming grew wider, and I stopped rushing to close it. I was not explaining anymore. I was not apologizing for space I claimed. The quiet grew sturdier around me, filling not with guilt, but with the slow, certain weight of a backbone forming. The first morning in my new apartment, the phone would not stop vibrating. 20 missed calls stacked over each other. Gavin's number flashing, then Sable's, then one I didn't recognize. I let them ring out until silence returned. Hours later, a message finally came. We almost called the consulate. Do you understand how worried we were? The words weren't about worry. They were about control, framed as panic to disguise it. I set the phone face down on the table beside the blue plate and let it buzz again. By the end of the week, an email arrived from Edric, written like a demand letter. He claimed I had abandoned their property at the border and owed them repayment for lost value. Roxanne added her own note, a sharper edge, suggesting my behavior might require legal action. I read both and closed the screen without answering. Only one message slowed me, Theo's text. Are you okay? Grandma? No punctuation beyond the question mark. No instructions? Just that. I held the phone in my hand for a long time. Still, I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to give him what his parents would only twist into proof of their narrative. Instead, I called Maeve. She listened, then drafted a cease and desist letter. All communication was to come in writing, addressed to her office, not to me. Let them put their words on paper, she said. It's harder to disguise intent when it's inked. The messages grew shorter after that. Gavin's voicemails carried the weight of someone caught between sides, one moment loyal husband, the next faltering son. I heard it in the pauses, the way his sentences trailed off as if shame had begun to catch him by the collar. I saved none of them. The silence I had claimed in Vermont was not something I meant to surrender now. And while their panic filled the airwaves, I sat in my chair by the window, watching sparrows land on the maple outside, my hands steady on the armrests, already bracing for the day one of them would appear at my door. He chose the cafe on Broadway, a place busy enough that we would not make a scene, quiet enough that words couldn't hide. When I walked in, Gavin was already at a corner table, his hands clasped, no Sable in sight. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders bent forward as though the weight he had once shifted to me had circled back. Mom, he began, rising slightly, but I didn't let him finish. Sit, I said, sliding into the chair opposite. The waitress brought water, and Gavin reached for his glass as if it might steady him. I don't know what happened at the border. He started, voice thin. It was hot. We were stressed apology first. I cut in. My tone left no space for negotiation. He blinked, his mouth parting and closing again. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then, with effort, he met my eyes. I'm sorry. What I said, what I let them say, it was cruel. You didn't deserve it. I nodded once. Good. Now, here are the terms. From my bag, I pulled out a folded document Maeve had prepared. His gaze flicked across the page as I spoke a written apology. Repayment for all expenses from the trip. The immediate end of any financial access to my accounts. And the rule that if Theo wanted to see me, he would have to ask himself. Not through anyone else. Gavin exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing into the paper. You've made this legal. I've made it binding. I answered. Respect. Or distance. There is no middle. He signed, the pen trembling just slightly in his hand. When he pushed the paper back, he kept his eyes lowered. Sable's parents, he said at last. They push. Always. Expectations. Appearances. I passed that down to you. Because it was easier, and that pressure stops here, I said, my voice steady. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy he had been, uncertain, caught between wanting approval and fearing he'd never earn it. He nodded, but the nod was small, as though he knew the true test would come when the room was no longer buffered by coffee and strangers. I slipped the signed memorandum back into my bag, stood, and left him there with his glass of water untouched, already knowing the silence of my apartment would feel steadier than his uncertain promises. Late summer arrived with its heavy warmth, and with it came a knock at my door. When I opened it, Theo stood there alone, taller than I remembered, awkward in the way 17 sits between boy and man. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand. I found this in my desk, he said, offering it to me. It was a crayon drawing, the kind only a child can make without hesitation. Our two figures side by side, my hair a wild yellow halo. His name scrawled in uneven letters. I traced the crayon lines with my thumb. May I keep it? I asked. He nodded, relief softening his shoulders. After he left, I slipped the drawing between George's letters in my bedside drawer. Some things deserve to be held close, even if they came late. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail, Gavin's handwriting on the front. Inside was a check for the full amount of the trip and a note no longer than a single line. No more passing pressure. For the first time, I believed him not because the words were grand, but because they were brief, stripped of excuses. Sable and her parents remained silent. The absence of their voices was not a loss, but a clearing. Like a room finally aired after years of stale breath. One Saturday, I boarded a train to Burlington. I walked the waterfront, watched the lake catch the sun, and let the quiet of the water settle into me. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I placed the blue-rimmed plate on the kitchen table. It looked small against the wood, but it was enough. I brewed tea, set the cup beside it, and sat in the chair that was mine alone. I thought of the words at the border, the ones thrown like a careless dare, carry the bags or walk home. I had walked. Not to their home, not to the one I'd been assigned, but to the one I chose. The kind of home you build inside yourself, where the only keys that fit are the ones you decide to keep.